He accidentally tore her skirt. Now she's falling for her millionaire boss. The MillerTech building was livelier than usual that morning. Employees in crisp suits moved swiftly through the lobby, like rivers of motion in the busy rhythm of New York City. Among them stood Lena Hart, a young woman with determined eyes and a slightly worn-out office dress. She clutched a folder of resumes tightly to her chest, hands trembling. After nearly 3 months of unemployment, this interview was her final shot. The elevator doors slid open. Lena stepped inside, her heart pounding like she was at the starting line of a race. Just as the doors began to close, a tall man rushed in, hurried, focused, with a cup of coffee in his hand. The collision happened in a split second. Hot coffee spilled across Lena's light-colored dress. Worse, the hem of her skirt got caught on the man's watch strap and tore open with an audible rip. The air froze. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," the man stammered. Lena glanced down at her soaked dress, then up at the man's stunned face. Instead of exploding in anger, she let out a small laugh. "Well, at least now I'll have a reason to remember this interview." The man, none other than Ethan Miller, CEO of MillerTech, was taken aback by her reaction. He had never seen anyone handle such an awkward moment with such calm and humor. As the elevator reached the executive floor, Ethan turned to her quickly. "Come with me. I think I can help." Before Lena could process what was happening, she was already following him into a high-security office wing. That's when she realized the man who had just spilled coffee on her was none other than her interviewer, the CEO himself. From a torn dress, a spilled coffee, and a well-timed laugh, Lena's life was about to take a turn she could never have predicted. Lena followed Ethan down a long carpeted hallway, her heels clicking softly in the quiet, formal atmosphere. She was still reeling from the coffee incident, and even more embarrassed now, realizing she was about to be interviewed while wearing a torn skirt, damp clothes, and disheveled hair. Ethan led her into a small meeting room adjacent to the executive office. Soft lighting, dark wood furniture, and a vase of white orchids gave the space a sense of elegance without feeling cold. He motioned for her to sit, then poured 2 glasses of water himself. "You really don't need to worry," Ethan said with a half-smile. "This morning's situation, well, I'd say it already showed me what you're made of." Lena gave a small smile in return. She adjusted her posture, trying to hide the ripped portion of her skirt, all while wondering, was this a test, or was the universe just playing games? Ethan opened her resume, scanning her academic background and previous experience. "You were a content lead at Bright Hue Media? Why did you leave?" It was a familiar question, but coming from the CEO of one of the most influential companies in the city, it carried extra weight. "Because I refused to be part of a misleading campaign," Lena replied firmly. "It was a big client, lots of pressure, but I can't sell something I don't believe in." Ethan studied her face. A moment of silence passed, not awkward, but deliberate. He closed the folder. "What do you know about MillerTech?" "I know it's a leader in blending technology with community solutions," she answered. "I was especially impressed by the STEM scholarship program for girls in rural areas. That's not just CSR. That's vision." A real smile broke across Ethan's face, pleased for the first time. "I need someone who's not just good, but who believes in what they're doing." Lena tilted her head slightly. "I don't need a job just to pay bills. I need a reason to wake up each morning and feel like I'm not betraying myself." The room felt still. The background hum of the office faded as Ethan stood, walking to the window, then turning back to her. "Would you like to start today?" Lena's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Completely." In that split second, she realized that the strangest interview of her life might also be the most real opportunity she'd had in months. Diane entered the room as if on cue. Ethan gestured to Lena and said simply, "She's the new hire. She'll be working with marketing." Lena stood, bowing her head slightly. Gratitude swelled in her chest, mingled with hope, and a strange, sweet sense of disbelief. She didn't know what was ahead, but one thing was clear. Her fate had already begun to shift. Lena arrived at MillerTech early the next morning. She stood in front of the mirror in the women's restroom on the ground floor, adjusting her collar and smoothing her dark brown hair. Her new cream-colored dress, purchased with the last verse savings, gave her just enough confidence to push through the nerves tightening in her chest. At exactly 7:58 a.m., she stepped into the executive office wing. Diane Cooper, Ethan's longtime assistant, was already waiting with a clipboard in hand. Her expression was serious but not unkind. "We won't waste time," Diane said briskly. "I know your hiring was a bit unconventional, but I've seen my boss make some unusual decisions before, and he's usually right." Diane led Lena through a whirlwind tour of the company: data analytics, product design, marketing, legal. At each stop, Lena tried to remember names, take quick notes on her phone, and maintain a professional smile, even as her head began to spin. When they arrived at the marketing department, Diane stopped. "This is your battlefield." Lena's desk was by a large window overlooking the park. On it sat a brand new laptop, a box of onboarding documents, and a handwritten note: "Welcome aboard, E." There was no time to be sentimental. Diane placed a thick stack of printed materials on her desk. "We have a meeting with Japanese investors at 11. You'll need to print these reports, triple-check them, and deliver them to conference room 28 before they arrive." Lena nodded. She got to work connecting the printer, double-checking the files, scanning each chart and line of text. But at page 27, the printer jammed. Without panicking, she rushed to the tech floor, got help, then returned to finish the job, like she was running a relay race. At 10:52 a.m., the reports were printed, bound, and ready. She straightened her dress, took a deep breath, and walked to the meeting room. Ethan was already there, speaking with 2 guests from Tokyo. He glanced over when he saw her, his expression approving. "Right on time." "I like that," he said quietly. The meeting lasted over an hour. Lena sat in the corner, taking notes nonstop, her eyes tracking every chart and trend on the screen. When the session ended, one of the investors turned to Ethan and said in fluent English, "Your assistant is very professional." Ethan smiled, glancing at Lena. "She's not my assistant, but maybe I should reconsider." After the guests departed, Lena began tidying up. Just as she was about to leave, Ethan stopped her. "You did well today. I took a risk hiring you yesterday. But today, I feel good about it." Lena smiled, the weight on her shoulders lifting just a little. In that moment, she felt something deeper beginning to take root. Not just trust, but the start of something greater. After a tense first week, Lena gradually adjusted to the real rhythm of the job. Every morning, she arrived earlier than most, made her own coffee, and spent 10 minutes listing everything she needed to accomplish that day. Ethan, on the other hand, always arrived precisely on time. Never early, never late. But everything he did was executed with exactness. In a competitive environment like MillerTech, Lena understood that this consistency was what had kept Ethan at the top. Since the meeting with the Japanese investors, Ethan had started assigning her more responsibilities, not just in marketing, but in overarching strategy related to brand image and internal communications. What surprised her most was that, despite being the CEO, Ethan still made time to read every customer feedback email she recommended for inclusion in their reports. He left notes, commented line by line, and asked questions that pushed her to think deeper. They worked together more and more. At some point, Lena found herself staying at the office until 9 p.m. regularly. she didn't complain. In fact, she found comfort in working late when the office was quiet and the city lights glowed softly through the glass windows. One Thursday evening, a heavy rainstorm hit the city. Both she and Ethan were stuck at the office after a long meeting with the product development team ran overtime. As the last employee left the building, Lena and Ethan remained in a large, warmly lit conference room, sharing a late dinner of sandwiches and bottled water. "Have you ever thought about walking away from all this?" Lena asked unexpectedly. Ethan looked up, his eyes lingering for a moment before answering. "Plenty of times. When I first took over, I was only 26. No one believed in me, especially after the legacy my father left behind." "But you stayed," Lena said quietly. "There wasn't really a choice. And I needed to prove to myself that I was worthy of it, even if I wasn't him." Lena studied him. She had never seen Ethan speak so openly to anyone. In his voice was pressure, but also pride, the kind of pride that came from carrying a legacy while trying to forge his own path. In return, Lena shared why she had chosen marketing. Not for the money, not for the glamour, but because she believed that every good product began with a real story, a real person, a real struggle. "I want to do honest marketing," she said, "not just empty, glossy campaigns." Ethan nodded. "That's exactly what I've been looking for. Someone who understands that a brand isn't just a logo or a slogan. It's how a company speaks to the world." From that point on, something began to shift. They were no longer just boss and employee. They were two adults, each slightly disillusioned with the world, finding in one another something sincere. One night, as they stood side by side at a jammed printer around midnight, Lena's hand brushed against Ethan's. Both froze for a brief second, their eyes meeting, silent, warm, but something made them both pull away. Another time, in the elevator heading to the parking garage, Lena nearly slipped on the wet floor. Ethan caught her by the shoulders, steadying her. The moment lasted less than a minute, but Lena remembered clearly the strange feeling of safety in his grip. Yet neither of them said anything. Both were far too aware to cross the invisible line drawn by workplace professionalism. One night, the air conditioning on the 32nd floor broke down. Lena shivered slightly as she worked late on a communication strategy plan. Without a word, Ethan took off his blazer and gently placed it over her shoulders. "You don't have to push yourself this hard," he said quietly. "I've seen enough." Lena looked up and met his eyes, not the eyes of a CEO, but of someone who genuinely cared. In that quiet office, with only the two of them left and the soft wind brushing against the windows, something had undoubtedly changed. Neither of them voiced it, but both knew a quiet emotion was growing between them, built in the hours between spreadsheets and late-night edits. And if they weren't careful, it might grow beyond the boundaries they had once believed were unbreakable. Since the night Ethan placed his blazer over Lena's shoulders, their relationship had subtly shifted. It was no longer just about deadlines and deliverables. The quiet moments between them held more weight. A glance could say everything. A simple sentence now carried layered meaning. Though neither of them said it aloud, both Ethan and Lena sensed it. Something had begun to grow. But just as things were starting to become clearer, more honest between them, the past came knocking. Hard. It pushed against the fragile door they had barely dared to open, the door to something neither of them had been ready to name. And then Chloe Bennett, the woman who once stood beside Ethan, unexpectedly returned. It was a typical Wednesday at Miller Tech, back-to-back meetings, endless emails, and the constant hum of ringing phones. Lena had just finished a session with the design team and was making her way back to her desk when she saw Diane walking briskly from the reception area, her face more tense than usual. "What's going on?" Lena asked in a low voice. "Someone without an appointment," Diane replied curtly. "Insists on seeing Ethan." Before Lena could ask further, The elevator doors slid open. A woman stepped onto the executive floor, drawing everyone's attention. She wore a long camel coat, her blonde hair tied back, and her makeup flawless down to the smallest detail. Confidence radiated from her every move. Ethan stood near the conference room, deep in conversation with a colleague. He turned at the sound of sharp heels echoing through the hallway. For a moment, his entire face seemed to freeze. "Chloe," he said, his voice catching slightly. "We need to talk," she replied, her gaze briefly landing on Lena before returning to Ethan. "About what still belongs to me." Lena instinctively tightened her grip on the documents in her hands. No one had to introduce her. She knew. This was Chloe Bennett, Ethan's ex-wife. Ethan motioned for Chloe to step into his office. Just before they disappeared behind the door, Chloe turned and looked directly at Lena. "I'm sorry, you are—" "Lena Hart," she said evenly. "I work in the marketing department." Chloe gave a small nod, but her eyes said much more. It was a brief exchange, but heavy with implication. The air between the three of them felt unnaturally thick, as if the entire floor had stopped breathing. Back at her desk, Lena tried to refocus, but her thoughts were scattered. Later, in the break room, Diane joined her on the couch, as if knowing Lena needed something explained. "You know who she is, don't you?" "Chloe Bennett," Lena said softly. "Ethan's ex-wife. The only woman Ethan's ever refused to talk about," Diane added, her voice barely above a whisper. After a moment of hesitation, she continued, a truth that most had long stopped speaking aloud. "She cheated on him, on their wedding day, with his best friend. He found the messages on their honeymoon." Lena was stunned, not by the story itself, but by the sadness in Diane's expression, the look of someone who had once believed in love and watched it shatter. That entire afternoon, Lena tried to drown herself in work. But Chloe's image, her poised stride, that confident smirk, clung to her thoughts like smoke. Lena wasn't jealous, but she was worried, because some people don't come back to make things right. They come back to reclaim what they think they still own. After Chloe's sudden return, the air on the executive floor turned strangely quiet. Ethan smiled less, Lena grew more reserved, and even Diane seemed unusually tight-lipped. It was as if each of them was carrying something they couldn't yet say aloud. But the real disturbance had nothing to do with love. Early one Monday morning, Ethan received the Q2 financial report from the accounting team. At first glance, everything looked routine, until he noticed a strange inconsistency in the clean energy project budgets. A single vendor had been paid 3 times for the same work at 3 different price points. His brow furrowed. He printed the entire file and walked straight to Lena's office. "Do you have a minute?" he asked without preamble. Lena looked up. "Always." He placed the documents in front of her. "I need a second pair of eyes, and a head that's not already biased." Lena sat down and started combing through the data, line by line, chart by chart, contract by contract. It didn't take long before she noticed multiple payment confirmations sent from what appeared to be internal email addresses. But upon deeper inspection, none of them existed in the company system. Even worse, several contracts had been modified after approval, with no edit history left behind. "Someone's doing this from the inside," Lena said quietly. Ethan nodded. "And they know exactly what they're hiding." That afternoon, Chloe returned once again, but this time without the confident strut. She asked to speak with Ethan in private. Over an hour later, she emerged from his office with red-rimmed eyes. Lena crossed paths with her in the hallway. Chloe didn't look smug anymore. Instead, she paused, looked Lena in the eye, and said softly, "I was manipulated into hurting Ethan, not because I was cruel, but because I was weak. Now I just want to make it right, with as little damage as possible." Lena didn't respond, but her eyes showed clear skepticism. She knew remorse often came from loss, not clarity. That evening, Ethan and Lena sat side by side once again. Between them were charts of project connections, access logs of suspicious activity, and a list of questionable financial entries. "Who do you think is behind it?" Ethan asked. Lena scanned the list. "We need to look at who has approval access, who can manipulate internal emails and edit documents, but wouldn't be the first suspect." They fell silent for a moment. Then their eyes met. No words were needed. They both understood. This wasn't just a financial error anymore. It was a dangerous game, and they had just moved the first piece on the board. As the pieces began falling into place, Ethan and Lena realized time was running out. If they didn't act soon, the damage wouldn't just be financial. It would be reputational, emotional, and everything MillerTech had worked for over decades. On Tuesday morning, Ethan personally convened an emergency meeting with the internal audit team. On the big screen, altered financial records were shown alongside IP addresses from unauthorized logins. The digital trail led to one person, Richard Owens, the company's COO, and Ethan's longtime friend since college. Lena stood behind Ethan, clutching a USB drive that contained the final piece of the puzzle, an audio recording she had captured the night before. It was a private conversation between Chloe and Richard, recorded in the parking garage. As promised, Chloe had approached Richard pretending to want to rebuild their alliance, to coax the truth out of him. Lena had hidden a microphone in Chloe's handbag, and what they captured was undeniable. When Ethan called a full executive board meeting, Richard walked in with his usual confidence. He sat at the head of the table, wearing his tailored blazer, with the same familiar smirk, part friendly, part smug. Ethan wasted no time. He connected his laptop to the room's audio system and hit play. Chloe's voice came first. "You're sure the system won't leave a trace?" Richard's voice followed, deep and deliberate. "Relax. I wrote that patch myself. Ethan will never know." Silence blanketed the room. Richard's face paled. He started to sweat, his eyes darting from one executive to another. "What the hell is this?" he stammered. Ethan stepped forward and dropped a stack of printed contracts and spoofed emails onto the table. "This is what you've been doing behind my back for 8 months. Richard sprang up. "I did this for the company. I was testing the system. It was an experiment." "An experiment?" Ethan's tone was razor sharp. "You forged contracts, transferred real funds, impersonated me in internal approvals, and you call that an experiment?" No one came to Richard's defense. Diane entered with another folder, this one full of technical logs, time-stamped evidence, and confirmed manipulations traced back to his credentials. Ethan looked straight at the man who had once been like a brother. "I don't need an apology. I need you out of this company, immediately." Richard opened his mouth, but no one was listening anymore. He walked out slowly, surrounded by a sea of disappointed eyes. After Richard left the boardroom, the atmosphere remained heavy. The executive team sat in stunned silence, still processing the betrayal that had just unfolded. Ethan stood, straightening his blazer as he addressed the room. "This will not happen again," he said firmly. "Starting today, we'll begin a full review of our internal control systems. Access privileges will be clearly restructured, and every new project will require a 3-tier independent approval process." Diane nodded and began taking notes. A few other executives grabbed their pens as if waking up from a long daze. Ethan paused, then turned toward Lena. "And finally, I want to say thank you." Lena blinked, slightly surprised. All eyes shifted to her. "When things could have easily collapsed, you chose clarity over comfort, truth over safety. MillerTech owes you, not because you're diligent, but because you placed values above ambition." Lena didn't speak. She simply bowed her head slightly. But inside, she knew. Every late night, every messy document, every time she bit back feelings in front of Ethan, it had all been worth it. One board member spoke up. "I believe we should consider promoting Lena to lead our communication strategy. Someone like her shouldn't remain behind the scenes." Ethan smiled. "I agree." In that quiet moment, Lena didn't need applause. The respect in the room, that was the greatest reward of all. After Richard's departure, the office gradually returned to its usual rhythm. But between Ethan and Lena, there remained a quiet space, something unnamed, suspended in the silence. They no longer stayed late. No more stolen glances hidden behind professionalism. And somehow, that made things harder to say. Ethan grew more reserved. Lena focused on transitioning materials to the new strategy division. They still spoke, briefly, politely, never touching what lingered between them. Until one late evening, the lights in Millertech's headquarters had mostly gone dark when Lena stepped onto the top floor. At 6:45 p.m., she'd received a short message from Ethan. Dinner to celebrate surviving. The door to the CEO's office was slightly open, warm golden light spilling out like an invitation. As Lena stepped in, the scent of Italian food filled the air. Pasta, wine, and the subtle sweetness of candle wax. Ethan's desk had been cleared, replaced by a small round table near the window. He stood beside it, pouring wine. "Welcome, Millertech's hero," he said, smiling gently. Lena laughed and sat across from him. "If you call me a hero one more time, I'm doubling my hourly rate." They clinked glasses, laughter echoing softly in the quiet room. No spreadsheets, no deadlines, no glances stolen across monitors. Just two people and the things they hadn't yet said. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then set his glass down. "I fell in love with you," he said softly. "From the very first day." Lena froze, her breath catching. "When you walked into that meeting with your dress torn on one side, trying to act composed," he continued, "then laughing at yourself, I'd never seen anyone so real." She said nothing, her eyes beginning to glisten. "I tried to keep my distance," Ethan added, "because of my role, the company, the fear of hurting you. But when you walked out of that boardroom with your laptop and your courage, I knew. If I didn't say it, I'd regret it forever." He stood, walked toward the balcony, and opened the glass doors. The night wind whispered through, and the city sparkled like a field of stars below them. Ethan turned to face her, a small navy blue box in his hand. "Lena Hart, you didn't just save this company. You saved the version of me I thought I had to bury to survive." He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring. "Will you help me write the rest of this story?" Lena covered her mouth. For a few seconds, she couldn't speak. Tears fell slowly down her cheeks. Then she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Whatever comes next, I'll walk with you." Ethan took her hand and slid the ring onto her finger. They looked at each other for a long moment. No words, just a shared silence full of everything unspoken. Their first kiss came quietly. Not rushed, not loud. Just two hearts finally meeting after all the trials, all the doubts, all the waiting. And outside, the city kept moving. But for them, that night was a pause, a moment to begin. After that night, there was no need for any more confirmation. Ethan and Lena became inseparable, not just as CEO and head of communications, but as partners in every sense of the word. Together, they began writing the next chapter of both their company and their lives. News of their engagement spread quietly through the company like a warm ray of light after a long season of storms. But to them, everything remained simple, quiet, just as it had always been. No grand gestures, no spectacle, just a promise to walk forward, hand in hand. And then the big day arrived. That day, MillerTech's headquarters was no longer a place of tense meetings or back-to-back emails. The entire 32nd floor had been transformed into a glowing wedding hall filled with white flowers and soft lights. The glass walls reflected the clear afternoon sky, creating a space that felt modern, yet tender, just like their story. Ethan stood beside Diane at the front of the hall, hands clasped tightly as if holding his breath. Today, he wasn't a CEO. He was a groom, waiting for the woman who had changed his entire life to walk down the aisle. Soft music filled the room. The doors opened. Lena stepped in, wearing a simple white dress, holding a bouquet of white lilies. Chloe followed behind as the bridesmaid, smiling gently, no longer the one between them, but someone witnessing something truly beautiful. Diane spoke first. Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes shone with pride. "I've seen Ethan fall," she said, "but the first time I saw him truly come alive was the day Lena walked into the company and dropped her coffee on day one." Laughter rippled through the room. Lena smiled, her eyes slightly glassy. When it was time for vows, Ethan looked into her eyes and said, "I promise I'll never tear your dress again. Not in the boardroom, not anywhere else." Laughter echoed. Lena shook her head, but her eyes glowed with quiet tenderness. She replied, "I promise to always remind you to turn off the printer at midnight and to be the last one to leave the office with you, every time the storm comes." Bathed in the soft golden light of dusk streaming through the windows, they shared their first kiss as husband and wife. No longer just people surviving work, but two people choosing to live for each other. The guests included employees, partners, friends, even those who once doubted them. But in that moment, there were no titles, no roles, only one truth: that love can exist even in the coldest places, if you're brave enough to believe in it. That wedding ended in laughter, a few happy tears, and a golden sunset that painted the city sky. No one knew exactly what lay ahead, but everyone believed their love was strong enough to last. 5 years later, on an early autumn morning, a cozy suburban home outside New York glowed in soft sunlight. Inside a warm kitchen, the scent of toasted bread mixed with the giggles of a small child, the sound of quiet, everyday happiness. Lena lifted their 3-year-old daughter, Sophie, into her high chair, while Ethan stood at the counter pouring coffee. His sleeves were rolled up, hair slightly messy from playing with their daughter. Their life no longer revolved around overnight meetings or jam-packed calendars. Ethan still served as CEO. Lena continued leading communication strategy at MillerTech, but they had learned to slow down, to choose what truly mattered. "You know," Lena said as she sat at the table, "mornings like this make me thankful we didn't give up when things felt impossible." Ethan smiled and handed her the coffee. "If you hadn't spilled yours that day," he said, "I never would have had you." They both laughed, the kind of laugh shared by two people who had lived through it all: the hesitations, the tension, the late-night tears, and the courage to finally love without fear. Sophie suddenly waved her little arms and dropped a piece of toast on the floor. Ethan bent to pick it up and said to her with a grin, "It's okay, sweetheart. Daddy once spilled an entire cappuccino on something way more important." Lena smiled softly. She looked at Ethan, then at Sophie, and realized from one ridiculous little accident they had written a whole life together. Not a fairy tale, but something better, built not from magic, but from a torn skirt, spilled coffee, and two hearts choosing the long road together.